When Sephie first heard that Meridian was being invaded, she got scared. Her mind jumped to all of the pre-cataclysm stories about war that she had heard when she was a child. She imagined something bloody and awful. She had forgotten that any war comes down to its people, and the people of Meridian are strong. During this bit of narration, we see John Tacardi being escorted by two Candidorian guards to a jail. There are two more men posted outside who are armed with spears, showing you how seriously they are taking this. John is tossed into a cell and taunted for being the first counselor to get arrested. After the guards leave, a disheveled shape on the floor hicks. It's revealed to be an old man named Arn, who pulls off his wig. Taped to his bald head is a key. "Dratted horsehair," he curses, "always makes me sneeze. Now, come on, let's get out of here." Arn was selectively arrested just so that they, meaning the people of Meridian, could break John out of prison. They exit the cell, chatting far too much for a jailbreak, in my opinion, while they do so. The first guard that they run into, they distract with the wig, and then they knock him out. They quickly move outside, making their way to the nearest entrance of the tunnels that run beneath Meridian. John asks about the party that he was leading. Did they make it? "They're halfway to Beacon Notch by now," Arn says with a nod. "One more stop and they'll be on their way too." John's glad to hear it. He was opposed when Turo suggested that they expand the maze, but he sure is glad that they did it now. Arn lifts up a barrel, exposing a small entrance underneath. They slip in and are away. Sephie's about the only person on the island who knows the tunnels as well as Arn does. "That girl's as curious as a cat," he says. "Oh, I hope she's well." And she is doing great. But before we catch up with Sephie, that scene with John has a few things that I want to note. First off, we have our first big production flub from CrossGen. CrossGen's books were, simply put, gorgeous overall. Mark Atiyeh had made a lot of money in the tech sector, and those contacts and money had allowed him to stock the company with some of the best computers that the industry had at the time. They also had a printer that could publish their pages just as they would look in the final product, meaning that CrossGen could quality check their own comics before even sending them to the company that would then actually publish all of their comics. They knew what their book would look like when it would be printed before anybody else did. This means that there were very few quality problems that actually made it to the printing process. But not this time. During the escape scene with John and Arn, the lettering isn't quite finished. There's just no cleanup between the portions that connect the word balloons. It doesn't really interrupt the script at all. It is mostly legible, but it just stands out so much from a company that up to this point has really been nailing all of the end result work of the comic book. If I even remember correctly, I believe that CrossGen fixed this error in any reprints that they did, like in the trade paperback that collects issues 1 through 7. But still, it does make me flinch and smile at the same time seeing it here again. It's one of those details that is so small that I forget about it, and then I read the comic, and I turn the page, and I go, oh, the lettering right. Oh, this is adorable. I don't know. It's like watching a baby try to say a word and they screw it up. I don't know. It's something about it is just cute to me at this point. From a production standpoint, I'm sure it's frustrating, but as a reader 20 years on, I think it's kind of cute. Secondly, the whole scene is played with a tone that is honestly pretty fun and lighthearted. Arn's key being taped to his head is only something that they can pull off because the Candidorian soldiers don't know who Arn is or know what he is supposed to look like. So when they arrested him, they had no idea that he was actually bald, which, I mean, you could generally tell when a bald person is wearing a toupee, especially if they're going to hide a wig under it. But this is a trick, basically, that only works because the invaders aren't locals. So it enhances that Meridian versus Catador vibe that the author is clearly playing with. John and Arn tease each other during the escape. Arn mentions being in the Merchants' War, which explains his cunning and his willingness to fight back despite his age. The pair do use his wig on a string to distract one of the guards. Like, don't get me wrong, the entire scene is played very straight. These are two guys escaping a prison watched over by guards. But it also kind of feels like the war that they're fighting is like a PG war between children, right? Nobody's getting killed, nobody's really getting hurt. You see the guard, you punch him, you knock him out, you're running away. It's a dramatic opening, don't get me wrong. But I do think that on my reading of it, it reads as a little bit funny. But that's mostly because from here on out, things are going to get even more serious. This lightheartedness makes for a good opening, because by the end of the issue, things are going to get pretty dark. At least for what we've seen in Meridian. So, back to Sephie. Sephie is on a boat, finally free from Catador, flying her way back home. Yes! Fair winds or foul, she was on her way. This size of ship normally takes at least 3 people to fly it, but Sephie had been flying these things for years by herself. As such, her motions were so practiced and mechanical that she could kind of let her mind wander and really think about what she was going to do next. She had an entire army to stop on her island, and she had no idea how she was going to do it. She couldn't let Uncle Elon destroy her home. She was its minister now. It was her job to protect it. Sephie glances behind her back at Catador, and her jaw drops. Filling her vision is Elon's personal estate, which is a floating island tethered to Catador that has been specially shaped to look like Meridian. But it is not Meridian, obviously. There are no trees, there's no hills, it's all just palace. Is this why her father always berthed their ships on the other side of the island? Sephie asks. Did he know? That's when it hits her. This wasn't just a personal project for her uncle, an affectation for his childhood home. No. This was a prototype. That is what he wanted to do to her island. Well, not Sephie's Meridian, she swears. Not ever. And then a horn blows from behind her. 6 ships, all of them bigger than Sephie's stolen one, close in on her. She expected them to follow her, but not this soon. The lead ship blows the horn again. Its captain shouts into a bullhorn for her to cut sails and prepare to be boarded. And Sephie nearly does it. Years of mind your elders kicking in almost unconsciously. But those orders came from a Catadorian soldier, and so she shoved that thought, that training aside. Instead, Sephie sets her feet, pulled on the sails, and dropped her ship into a dive. Jad showed this trick to her one time. It only works with the little ships like what she has now. The pilot pushes the ship into the wind, forcing it against the ship's natural buoyancy. It takes a pilot who is very comfortable in their abilities, and you can't be afraid to see the ground to do this. The deck of Sephie's ship goes vertical, its nose pointing down. Sephie is held in place by just her feet braced against the wood, and the force of the wind whipping her hair and dress wildly. Jad called this the Death Dive. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 32.5 of Meridian, the Death Dive. Back on Catador, Elon has cleaned himself up after his long night with the Muse and his encounter with Sephie. His hair is carefully combed back into a small bun at the base of his neck. He wears a long robe, dark green in color. It's a very tense, very serious look for him. He chides the Muse for not seeing his niece's betrayal. Are you toying with me? I asked you if she had powers like mine. The Muse repeats,
that Sephie's gift is her own, but he shouldn't worry about her. What he wanted her to be is another's role, one who looks your opposite, but is your like.
A knock at the door interrupts them. Elon isn't done with Sephie yet, he says, but he does stop and opens the door. Several messengers enter the room and he gives them all their orders, which consist of this. He is dispatching their ships along the cardinal directions to every island they encounter. Anyone who is contacted by Sephie is to report it to him. If they don't, then he will deal with them personally. She is headed for Meridian, of course, but they don't want anyone else helping her along the way. He turns to the Muse, quite satisfied. You see, I have this well in hand, Muse. Muse? But the Muse of Gaiatan is gone. At the docks, a ship has landed and is disgorging its cargo and people. An older couple talks about business, and they're both sick of making the trip to Canador. But a tall, thin black woman shoves between them. Her hair is cut tight to her head. She has large decorative earrings on, and she has high cheekbones with very attentive brown eyes. "So this is Canador," she says. "Mine for the taking." Well, there we have one who looks your opposite but is your like type of character.
Man, the Muse of Gaiatan works fast.
On Meridian, John's journey has continued. He, Arn, and a few more Meridianites have stopped at the warehouse where Frisia was. We saw her help Jad escape Catadorian soldiers back in issue 2. But now, Frisia isn't there. John's spider senses tingling as his eyes scan the darkened warehouse. They're inside. Frisia shouts from the darkness, "Go back!" as soldiers surge forward. "Go back down! It's a trap!" John says that no, they won't leave her. No one who's agreed to leave gets left behind. The Meridianites fight back, and despite being outnumbered by the troops, they do pretty well. But one soldier still has a grip on Frisia, until he gets thwacked in the back of the head by another Catadorian. Frisia is confused by this betrayal. They all are. "Isn't he one of your own?" The soldier says no. He then pulls off his mask, revealing a young man with short blonde hair. He encourages them all to get out of here. Arn recognizes him. He leans over to John, whispering, "Isn't that the kid who got himself exiled? Some kind of scandal, if I recall." John looks at the young man warily. From the Meridianites, a young woman steps forward. "Bren?" she asks. "Hello, Lysella," he replies. These two clearly know each other, and Lysella walks over to him. She thought that he would never come back. And Bren says that he hasn't. He's just here as a Catadorian soldier. Now, they better get moving, but someone's going to need to knock him out so he can sell this story. John rolls up his sleeve, only too happy to volunteer. He knocks out Bren and then comforts Lysella. One good deed doesn't redeem him. She hesitates, wishing that things were different. "We all wish we could turn back the clock," John says, "but it only moves forward, as must they." The group moves on to Beacon Point, and then to freedom. Meanwhile, Sephie's pursuers have continued to chase her. They were better pilots than she expected, and they've begun to close in. The same guy who warned her to stop before calls out again, but this time to the other ships. He orders them to wait for his signal before firing their spears. But they don't. They all wanted the credit for Sephie's capture and return, and so they all fire their spears at once. The spears sink into the smaller ship easily. With their ships being much larger than hers, Sephie's boat was brought to an immediate stop. But like I mentioned earlier, she never secured herself to the deck. The ship stopped moving, and Sephie didn't. She kept going, and she rolls over the railing. She begins the long drop to the ground. Instead of fighting over who would get the credit for her capture, she narrates, they'll be fighting over who gets the blame. Which is very exciting. I'm glad Meridian's finally doing something. It only occurred to me late in writing this episode's script that one of the smartest things that author Barbara Kessel does in Meridian is use the Meridianites group as a source of action and excitement in these early opening issues, where Sephie is caught up in matters that are far less physical up to this point. Like, this moment here is the first moment that Sephie honestly really, like, chooses to do something. She rebels against her uncle, she steals a ship, she's trying to outmaneuver the pursuing ships. It's all very exciting, and given that CrossGen's comics were written specifically to be collected in a trade paperback, this is right when you would want that rise in action, right? We're at issue 4, we're really reaching the end of the arc, we've had build-up and build-up and build-up with Sephie and Alon and the conflict, and now we're finally getting some payoff. But Kessel knows that this comic still needs some excitement in it to get us to that point, which up until now is largely provided by the Meridianites. We've got Jad's escape in issue 2, we've got his rescue in issue 3, and then we really focus on his father's adventures in issues 3 and 4. And I kind of love it. The Sephie stuff in this issue is very exciting. Watching her deftly handle that ship like an expert is great. It is a perfect showcase of how she's in some prim and proper, well-behaved princess type of character. She's an adventurous, confident, maybe slightly cocky young woman. She's been taught how to handle a ship, and not just like intellectually taught, this is how you know how to handle a ship. She can handle a 3-person boat by herself. And this also helps to demonstrate a bit of what her relationship with Jad probably looked like when they were younger. I would guess that she was probably like the eager, excited girl who then started to ask a ton of questions, like when she and her father were visiting the shipyard. And John probably told Jad to, like, oh, watch over Sephie and answer her questions, just keep her out of the way and keep her quiet. Jad's the one who showed her the death dive after all, but she is clearly unafraid of doing it herself. This isn't something she was shown, this is something she's willing to do. There's also a few nice moments of humility in her speech, though. Sephie outright says that she didn't expect anyone to follow her so soon, her first mistake. The second was thinking she could outrun those larger, more numerous ships. And we even see that Uncle Alon is outmaneuvering her here, too, intellectually. He knows that she has a place to go, home, Meridian, and everybody knows where Meridian is. He knows that route, and so he is able to blockade it, or fill the skies with mercenaries or soldiers, and clearly, as he does here, ask for assistance from his allies. Even if Sephie did manage to outrun those ships, she would still not have been able to outrun the reach of Elon of Canador. Assuming that she survives this fall. After all, it isn't the fall that is the dangerous part, they say, it's the landing. This is also an interesting case of a surprise in a comic book not really being a surprise to the audience. When Sephie sees Alon's personal estate for the first time, learning that it is Meridian-shaped, it is treated as a big moment in this issue. And for Sephie, this is a big moment. This moment shows her the power, the madness, the drive, the vision of Elon all in one image. He's taken this hunk of rock. He took this island, he bought it, he reshaped it, and then paid for enough ore for it to float next to Canador. This isn't just like, I love Meridian, island of my birth, and he's got it like framed on the wall. This is obsessive. Seeing this solidifies how much Sephie is needed in order to stand against him, because otherwise there is no one who will. Author Barbara Kessel treats this as a big surprise. And like I said, for Sephie, I think that it works. But for us, as the audience, this actually isn't new information. We already saw Elon's personal estate back in CrossGen Chronicles issue 1, which I covered in episode 32.2 of this very series. It's one of the reasons that I covered it. I almost know what I'm doing up here. And so we've already seen that Elon's personal estate was Meridian-shaped to begin with. This is kind of a perfect example of how CrossGen storytelling works, and it's a strength and it's a weakness. If all you read was Meridian, then you would get the example of what Sephie and Alon's life was, what their sigils could do, and how they handle that as individuals. But if you read more of CrossGen's material, then you get to see things in a much broader context. In that CrossGen Chronicles issue, we saw Elan's island and we saw Sephie use her sigil. If you read more books, then you learn more stuff. But you didn't have to. Everything that we saw in CrossGen Chronicles has now been demonstrated for us at this point in Sigil. We still got... I think I just said that we saw it in Sigil, and that's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about Meridian. We saw that in Meridian. We still get all of the story elements from Chronicles in Meridian, but a step behind the story of Meridian. That broader picture that we get to look at when we look at everything then allows us to kind of zoom back in when you read each individual book and put all the pieces together. We only get a snippet of Uncle Elan in this issue, and as I already point out, it demonstrates his cunning pretty nicely. I am much more interested in how he seems to think of the Muse as his ally, accusing her of hiding this betrayal by Sephie. And I mean, sure, the lady has been helping him mostly so far, but Elan has clearly forgotten that it was the Muse who told Sephie about the portrait that he wears, the very thing that set her off running. Sephie said it was the little woman who told me about it, and admittedly, I suppose that could mean anybody on Elan's estate, but I feel like the Muse is pretty short. There's one little woman in this comic, and it's the Muse. She's here for her own purposes. And sometimes they'll align with Elan, and right up until now, I would say that he's been benefiting from them. And this time, though, her purpose does not. I like Kessel refusing to draw out the mystery of who Elan's apprentice is going to be, already setting up that character here, but I do have my first major complaint. We're at issue 4 of Meridian. Elan has now spent 2 whole issues and 3 different scenes where the main interaction that he had with the Muse was him asking her if he and Sephie had the same powers. And the Muse has said the same thing every time. No, she has powers all of her own. And sure, she is oblique about it, but come on, man. Get your head in the game. Elan is an educated, experienced, cunning man. He is a master of the Weevil words, as we have seen on the page, and I meant weasel words. You're going to tell me that he can't figure out what the two share no looks, no likes, no drive. Why would you think they would share power means? You think he doesn't know what that means? Elan might be a greedy, selfish, evil man, but he is not stupid. Come on. Finally, we have the last scene with John and the other Meridianites continuing their escape. Much like Sephie's story, Kessel has had to pace this story in order to fill out the story arc, which should end at issue 7, right? So we are fast approaching it. But she's wisely used this time to provide us with action, like I said, and to continue to flesh out the world of Meridian, and not just the island, but the entire comic. We've learned about the various peoples on Meridian, we've gotten sneak peeks into their history, which makes them feel more grounded, more real, and important. When Catador invaded Meridian, I was upset for Sephie, but honestly not for the people of Meridian. I didn't know them. Now I do. Now we do as an audience. And they seem like a lovely bunch of people, to be quite honest. The scene between Bren and Lisa helps to flesh things out even more. We see that the Meridianites aren't perfect. Bren did something worthy of being exiled. He is here now as a mercenary, yes, but he also helped his ex-countrymen. He clearly seems to share some feelings for Lysella. I would argue she shares them for him as well. And as with the real world, does this make Bren a bad guy? Is he a good guy? And ultimately, much like reality, no. He's a little bit of both, like we all can be. And given how the book has really been setting up Sephie to seem like this pure, innocent, good person, and her uncle is this diabolical madman, it is nice to see this more layered, more complicated type of person show up in the comic. Even John, who has been generally heroic up to this point, can't forgive Bren for whatever sin it was that he committed in the past. This specific situation of Catador invading Meridian might be a clear-cut good and evil type of story, but the day-to-day situation of that conflict is a bit more complicated. One of the things that occurred to me in this issue as well is how diverse the world of Meridian is. Both Meridian and Scion, and I would have to check, but I would bet good money on Mystic and Sigil doing it too by now. All of the comics had black people in their first few issues. The competitor who went before Ethan in the tournament was a black man. We saw him get healed before Ethan took the tournament floor. And we saw Stu in Meridian issue 1, and now we have this person who looks like Elan's opposite but is his like that the Muse prophesized. Lysella looks like fairly brown-skinned to me, so maybe she's some kind of Spanish descent. She could just be light-skinned. And I bring this up because it's really easy for a creative team of mostly white people to create worlds that are mostly populated by white people, overlooking the existence of color by accident. The worldview of the creative team is white-centric, so unless they specifically make it a point to think about people of color, they just don't put them in. This is something that even I was guilty of when I made my own comics. God, now it's been 10 to 15 years, but as a white person, you just don't think about it. It becomes something that you have to recognize as, oh, I'm not even considering whether there are black people in my world, or brown people, or Asian people, or anybody else. And it's something you have to consider because that's just how the world is built. So CrossGen is making an effort to establish early on in its publication history that all of their worlds have multiple ethnicities, and those people are of equal standing with the white folks. For a white person reading these comics, it probably doesn't really matter all that much. You're reading the comic, you're enjoying the comic, you're having a good time, hooray. But for a black person who is trying out CrossGen's comics, it might feel more welcoming for them to see themselves represented in one of these comics, even if it was only in a background role for now. Meridian clearly has a black woman who is going to be playing a larger role in the comic. She is Elan's opposite but like person. And CrossGen would eventually launch a book starring a black man, one Obregon Kane of the comic Negation, but that's still a long way off in CrossGen's lifetime. Although I do flooping love Negation as well. Issue 5 of Meridian opens with the messengers from Catador visiting 4 other islands, specifically Torbell, the iron worker city, Viland, where lawyers are trained, Ring City, home to bookmakers, and Nescoin, those who make carriages. They deliver Elan's message, saying that Sephie is addled because of all the terrible loss that she has suffered, and if she visits them, he would just be ever so grateful if he was notified. He just wants her to be safely returned to him. And meanwhile, Sephie is dropping out of the flooping sky. Sephie's narration during the 3-page fall focuses on a nice bit of world building, a concept regarding a monster called the Edge. Stay away from the edge. Children die at the edge. You weren't playing near the edge, were you? Parents would ask their children. And every so often a child would be taken by the monster. But once you got older, you realized what really happened to that kid. And that's when the fear of the edge becomes real. But then you grow up, right? The fear becomes just another ordinary, everyday fear. You don't think about it anymore. Or at least, Sephie didn't think about it anymore. The monster has her now. So why wasn't she afraid? With her sigil glowing a soft yellow light, Sephie hits the ground. Back in the sky, we return to Catador after night has set. Minister Elan has fallen asleep in his plush chair, still wearing his green robe with its golden ornaments. A locket has been left pulled out from underneath it, and the image is still open, but hidden from us. His hair is no longer carefully swept back neatly. He's back to looking a little bit disheveled and worried. LaRossi, one of Elan's employees, I believe his major domo, reports that he's asleep. To the captain who pursued Sephie last issue. He's come to tell his minister what happened, but together the pair decide not to wake Minister Elan. Sephie's tragic fate won't be changed overnight. And Elan did stay up all last night interrogating that grotesque woman, meaning the Muse. Best not to add any more pain. LaRossi eyes the captain quizzically. His pain? Or yours? Back over on Meridian, we see John's group arrive at a cavern where the escaping Meridianites have holed up. There is some really solid conversation here, but I am skipping that for time reasons, jumping to John spotting his son, Jad, and Mira further down in the cavern. When he sees them, he takes off running. And Jad's surprised by this. His dad isn't really that sentimental, and I mean, he is sure that he loves him and that he was worried about him, but I mean, to be this worried? He's probably heard about Jad's rooftop escape, though, how he dodged those Catadorian soldiers, which, it's worrying, but it's not like it was that dangerous. It's good to know that his dad cares, but John Tacardi rushes right past his son, embracing Mira instead. He picks her up and they spin around, both of them saying how worried they were. It takes John a second to actually notice his son, but when he does, it's only slightly awkward. Son, I'd meant to tell you, but there just hadn't been time, and Jad cuts him off. Dad, it's okay. It's just, did I have to find out after everyone else? Mira, you could have let me know, he says, clearly hurt from being left out of this relationship. Mira looks at him with big eyes. But you said it yourself, Jad. I'm not your mother. Floopin' burn, Jad! As morning rises on Catador, the black woman that we saw arrive on the island last issue now approaches Alon's estate. And honestly, I'm surprised that a person can do that. You would think that Alon would have a gate, or a wall, or a guard, or something based upon the social divide of his island. It feels weird that he's that reachable to a normal person. Anyways, she knocks on the door and asks to see the minister. LaRossi, doing his job, tries to shoo her away. There are protocols to be followed, of course. Politely, and pretty charmingly, this woman says that she understands. But those protocols are for the mindless who take direction, not like them. If he could just slip her somewhere into the minister's schedule, that would be great. And asking nicely seems to work. LaRossi tells her to come back this afternoon, and he'll see what is available. Wow! What a nice guy LaRossi is. I wouldn't have expected that. Anyways, he returns to Alon when he is shouted for. He has Captain Pat Ginn return and give his report. And the captain is surprisingly forthcoming. He outright says that they failed. The Minister of Meridian's ship was speared, but she was not secured to it. They were unable to stop her. She fell. Alon, who had been eating some form of porridge for breakfast, drops his spoon. You're telling me that she's dead? Alon stands, and Pat Ginn tries to stand as well, maintaining his social status below Alon, but the minister drops a hand on his shoulder. No, don't get up. I need to make you understand something, he says, squeezing the captain's shoulder. We see the red glow begin to emanate from Alon's palm. You do realize what an astounding failure this represents. Perhaps the touch of my hand on your shoulder, or the power that hand wields, will provide a reminder to you to be more careful in the future. Captain Patkin screams. When Alon finally leaves the room, we do see Patkin slumped over in his chair. He appears to be alive, while his shoulder smokes and smolders. Alon orders LaRossi and Bosco to clean up the mess, and then he finds a private space. He immediately slumps against the door, running a hand over his face before pulling out that locket that we saw earlier. Oh, I dare you, forgive me, he says, breaking down just a little bit. I've destroyed the last of you. Stupid, stubborn girl. What is having Meridian without you? On that particular island, we see the Meridianites go through their final preparations. Jad says goodbye to Mira, who gives him a package of food supplies. He thanks her for it, calling her mom, and she wishes him luck. Phoebe and Zuka don't want to see him go either, Phoebe's infatuation clearly on display again. but Jad remains oblivious because he is dedicated to saving Sephie. His father, John, cuts in and warns Jad not to do anything stupid. Get Sephie and get out of Catador. And if she's not there, then just move on and meet them at Ring City. Don't put yourself in unnecessary danger, Jad, please. Because no one could replace you. After they hug, Jad leaves for Catador. The collected Meridianites just leave, and as they do, John gives a rousing speech. It ends with him saying that no matter where the wind takes them, no matter how far or how long, as long as they carry the essence of Meridian within them, then they will always be the people of Meridian. But what about the daughter of Meridian, the star of this comic? What's happened to Sephie? Because she can't really be dead, right? Like, it's a bold move to make for any kind of comic. Down below, back on the surface, we see a figure wearing a raincoat-esque coat approaching a lush growth of forest. The coat looks like it is made of leather, maybe rubber, and it is colored a bright orange and yellow. The back of the hood is marked with a sunburst effect. As this person walks up to the small growth, they are amazed by it. The plant life, it's healthy and blooming? What's happened here? This person, who pulls off their hood, revealing that they are a woman with long, dark hair, takes in all the bright green life. It's beautiful, she says, spreading her arms. And then she pauses, because moaning as she sits up is Sephie. The woman rushes over and helps Sephie up, asking her a bunch of questions, although she quickly realizes that Sephie is in no real shape to answer them. She needs to get her someplace before the monsters come out. But Sephie's narration says that this woman, her rescuer, put together the connection between Sephie being in this veritable forest and the impossible existence of the forest to begin with. For her part, Sephie was just too out of it to really understand what had happened. Oh, she knew that she had fallen from the sky and somehow lived. But how had that happened? She would learn that later, that and much more. Her new friend, however, knew the importance of this discovery immediately. The land beyond her city had been blighted for centuries, incapable of producing life like this, and yet here it was, restored where Sephie appeared. Whatever happened here, Sephie seemed to be the cause of it. The camera pulls out, floating the audience high in the sky above the women's retreating forms. Where Sephie landed is the new growth of the forest, shaped in the exact same way that Sephie impacted on the land. Thus continues the mystery of the sigil, and exactly how it works and what it does. Sephie should have hit the ground and gone like a rotten watermelon, but we are shown the actual moment that Sephie makes impact. And admittedly, we don't get to see her, so what shape she was in when she finally stopped, we don't really know. But we are shown a kind of cartoon-esque, human-shaped impact on the ground, like Wile E. Coyote falling from the sky in Looney Tunes. And Middleton's artwork has been fairly realistic in Meridian up to this point. Like, there's been no physical comedy in the book at all, so it is unlikely that that artistic choice was meant as a joke. When Sephie hit the ground, she did so and she remained intact to begin with. Given that Sephie's sigil seems to be able to heal or restore things, I would have assumed that Sephie would have impacted and then the sigil, like, running on autopilot, just like healed her body. The release of that healing energy then would have outflowed into the surrounding environment since it didn't have Sephie's conscious mind to guide it. But Sephie's sigil was glowing as she fell from the sky. We are shown this. So I would guess that, knowing intellectually what was about to happen to her, Sephie unconsciously, charged her body with that healing energy. Like, the sigil did it automatically. This is what has allowed her to stay intact when she landed on the ground, and then once her body was healed, the excess energy just bled into the landscape. If, again, you had been reading more than one CrossGen title, like, oh, I don't know, Scion, which we talked about on this very show, then you would have read issues 1 through 5 of that comic up to this point. You would have seen Prince Braun scar Ethan at the end of issue 2, and you would have seen his miraculous healing going into issue 3. We know definitively that the sigil can heal, and apparently that is something that applies to more than just one sigil bearer. Otherwise, the majority of this issue is really dedicated to Elan and the Meridianites. Sephie is mostly setting up her adventure for the next 2 issues, which then closes out our first arc, kinda sorta. We'll get there. We see Elan upset that Sephie is dead, we see him rage while punishing Captain Patkian, and we get to see him mourn the loss as well. All of this feels right for him, it's all in character, but interestingly, Elan doesn't seem to be mourning the loss of his beloved niece. Instead, he is upset that the last remaining piece of Idaria, who is Sephie's mother, now named in the comic for the first time, is gone forever. What good will it be for him to take Meridian if Sephie is lost? Elan, when he is upset here, isn't an upset uncle. He is more like a collector who's not going to be able to finish his set. Sephie is a thing to be kept, not a person to be respected and loved. This doesn't make me like Elan anymore as a person. I am not wishing that he succeed here, but it does help me understand him more on like a human-to-human emotional level. I do think that it's a true bit of humanity, twisted as it is in him. And it's one of the few honest looks into Elan's soul that I feel like we've seen up to this point. This isn't a sneaky trick, it isn't a business move, or Elan acting in his role as minister. This is just Elan, the man, dying a little bit more inside, when most of him has died long ago. While we don't really get to see what happened to Captain Patkian, I would argue that Elan's point is made. First off, don't fail Elan, even accidentally, or you're going to pay for it dearly. Secondly, this is the first time that Elan uses his sigil in front of/on someone other than Sephie. He is growing more comfortable with this power, and in the wielding of it. And finally, we know that the sigil can affect human flesh, which we hadn't seen happen in this comic yet. I do think that the scene between LaRossi and this new female character is really too easy for her. Like I said before, Elan does not feel like a minister of the people, right? He lives on a private island, he enforces an economic divide between his citizens, he is actively okay with spurning business from other islands if they piss him off. The idea that just anyone could walk up to his front door and knock on it and just say, hey, can the minister squeeze me in today? Feels really unlikely. Taking that a step further, the fact that just asking LaRossi to be put on the schedule, like with no introduction, there's no business stated here, there's no even pitch for like what the meeting is, also feels really unlikely. Now, it is possible that LaRossi has picked up on qualities that his employer likes in other people. We see him and Bosco comment on the Sephie situation a little bit in this issue, and they would have to be pretty sensitive to Elan's moods and methods to have survived in his employ this long. Elan doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would employ fools, so they would have to be good at what they do, right? Artistically, I do have to say that the two men look extremely similar. Like, they could be twins, to be quite honest, save for their clothes. Middleton is not afraid of drawing a misshapen guy in order to make him stand out, but these two poor souls got so little thought. It's almost funny. The Meridianites portion of this book is largely more world building from author Kessel, although we do get some good stuff with John, Jed, and Mira. We get a couple more named characters, we learn their thoughts on leaving Meridian and how much they think Catador botched up this invasion. A pair of strong men chat about their eventual escape route, and they comment that they would have done a better job keeping Meridian policed than Catador has. This could indicate that these men were also in the Merchants' War, which Arn mentioned last issue, or it could mean that the Meridianites just take their job much more seriously than these hired thugs from Catador do. We've already seen that the Meridianites take pride in their work back in issue 1 when John and Stu commented on the incoming Catadorian ships, and I would say that that trait is being reinforced here, which is cute. I also love the reveal with John and Mira being a couple behind Jad's back. This was clearly set up back in issue 3 when Mira was fussing over Jad and he angstily said, "Oh, you're not my mom!" I love that the line gets thrown back in his face here, although it does feel really good-natured. Like, hearing that from Jad in the moment back in issue 3 really must have stung Mira, who clearly loves John and clearly is at least trying to be affectionate towards Jad in a motherly way. So getting Mira to kind of burn him back with it feels a little bit like just desserts. I love it. And I also love that there isn't a lot of hand-wringing over the drama related to it. John does say that it has been years since Jad's mom died and she would want him to be happy, like he is trying to justify this course of action to Jad, but Jad honestly doesn't argue the point at all. He gets it, and he wants his dad to be happy, and I like that. All of this is done very dramatically, but it isn't done just for the sake of drama, if you get me. I also like that no one tries to hold Jad back from going after Sephie. Like, yes, they're all worried about him, and yes, they help him prepare for this, and yes, they tell him to move on, kid, as soon as you're able, but they don't try to stop him. John and Mira trust Jad in doing this, and given how young he appears to be, I think that's pretty remarkable. You don't really see this in a lot of adventure storytelling where parents will be like, "Okay, kid, go off and have your adventure, just please come back to me alive." It's always, "No, you can't go," and then the kid has to sneak out on their own. Not here. Not with John and Mira. It feels like the people of Meridian just trust their kids. We see that with the minister's daughter running around the island pretty carefree, and now we see it again here with Jad heading off into what is essentially enemy territory, the enemy stronghold. Where Catadorians felt scared on their own island, the Meridianites feel secure in almost everything that they do. Even now, when forced to flee their homes, they don't feel scared of Catador. They feel angry, honestly, determined. Seeing that same energy reflected in Sephie and in Jad is great, and it really sells me on the different culture of Meridian when compared to what we've seen in Catador. Artistically, I do want to say that this issue does shake things up a little bit. Issue 5's creative team was pretty much the same as usual, save for colorist Paul Mounts. He is new to the team this issue, stepping in to help bridge us to the new incoming colorist. Oh, but what a job he did! The colors in this entire issue just pop off the page. No offense intended to previous colorist Michael Atiyeh, who stepped off of Meridian in order to color CrossGen's 5th ongoing title, starring the first, who we got a glimpse of back in CrossGen Chronicles issue 1, now they get their own series. Atiyeh's issues honestly looked great. Like, to me, 10 out of 10 all the way around. And as I pointed out with issue 3 of that comic, he was clearly getting a little more comfortable into the book. Atiyeh had begun to use colors to not just portray the world of Demetria as it was, but to also enhance specific story beats, like when Sephie tried to kiss Jad, we got that panel of pink. But probably because he had some lead time in coloring this issue, Paul Mounts crushes the absolute hell out of it. It's like wearing sunglasses, but not knowing that you were wearing sunglasses and then taking them off, going from the last issue to this issue. Everything here feels so much more vibrant. There are more highlights and more lowlights, for example. Mounts also colors a lot of the gutters in this particular issue, meaning the spaces that are between the comic panels. There are a few times where penciler Middleton either forgoes panels completely, like when Sephie falls, actually, or he'll have a character break from a panel. And in those cases, the colorist still has to, color that panel, but then extend those colors to the entire page, because there's no framework blocking everything in. We saw colorist Rod Reese do this quite a bit when I covered Jeff Johns' Aquaman run. Personally, I love when a colorist does this with their comic gutters. It just makes the pages feel more complete. like as an audience, I'm experiencing the scene because the coloring typically matches the mood of whatever's going on or the background of whatever's going on, right? It almost feels more like watching a movie than reading a movie kind of thing. Like, we're experiencing it more so than watching it. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. I just really like it. We will see our new colorist step in next issue, though. We're going to have a bunch of artistic things happen next issue. So do not get used to Mount's excellent work here too much. Appreciate it for what it is, but accept the fact that we're going to have to move on because things are going to change. In fact, next week, Sephie has escaped her uncle, who now thinks that she is dead. You would think that this means that she's finally safe from him, right? At least for now. The surface world has its own problems, I'm afraid, and the Minister of Acacia has her own problems to solve. Given her strange and miraculous powers, that solution could be Sephie. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 32.6 of Meridian. Good business. If you enjoyed this episode of Breakdown, please make sure to hit that like button, and if you are not subscribed to the show, then click on that as well. I love getting feedback, and I would really appreciate it if you did so. If you have any questions, concerns, or would like to suggest a comic or a series to me, Breakdown can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and on a variety of podcast platforms, with links in the description for this episode below, as well as the email cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Thank you for your time and attention.